Have you ever felt like no one truly understands your grief? Rosalyn Rourke, a best-selling author who has worked deeply in mental health and trauma therapy as a psychotherapist, hosts our next Rise and Renew host takeover experience, guiding you through a reflective quiz that helps you explore your own unique experience. She encourages you to embrace your personal grief and challenges the idea that healing should follow a specific path. Roslyn also invites you to join her intimate small gathering experience and her free monthly event, Courageous Connections. Come join us and take that first step towards healing with a community that understands. Hi there, and welcome to the Grief and Rebirth podcast. I'm your host, author and trauma survivor Irene Weinberg, here to encourage you wherever you are in your healing journey. In each episode, I chat with incredible grief and trauma specialists, healers, mediums, and celebs, as well as remarkable people who have inspiring healing stories to share. If you're looking for a podcast that's both uplifting and inspiring, you've found it. Let us help you find your joy in life.
Hello. Even though we've probably not met, I think we might have a lot in common. So I'm picturing that you can imagine this. I'm in my favorite chair, getting ready to listen to Irene's fabulous podcast. And right before I open it, I check my email. And guess what's there? An invitation to be a host on this incredible podcast. So I'm beyond excited to be here with you today. I want this podcast to offer you the excellence that Irene's other hosts have given you. And I feel like we're a tribe, all of us, because people that are willing to talk about death, grief, resilience, rebirth. We're a small group and growing, thank goodness growing, but people who I feel very connected with. And you'll find out why it's super special in my life. The reason I resonate so deeply with grief and rebirth. I'll tell you the bottom line first, and then I'm going to take you on a journey. Hopefully, it will be a game changer for you, as it has been for me. First, I have a question for you, real quick. Have you ever considered that whether you're healed, broken, or just alive, depends on your perspective. It depends on your definition of all of those things. So before I deliver on my gift to you, which is from my heart, from my mind, from my experience as a therapist, as a grieving mother, as a wisdom seeker and finder, as an elder, before I deliver any of that, I have a little quiz that I want to share with you so that we can all get into the vibe of what are, I want to say unconscious. They're not unconscious. We're conscious of them, but our deep-seated beliefs. Because our beliefs are behind our thoughts and our feelings. They are our thoughts and our feelings, but they're also conditioned. When we hear or listen to our beliefs from one another, we actually learn a lot about our background without even sharing it. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to read to you some questions. And they're going to be super easy. but hopefully they'll put you in the vibe of what your beliefs are, and we can move from there to where your new vision and your new experience is desired. So, true or false? Grief is love with nowhere to go. I'll read it again. Grief is love with no place to go. And you can write down your answer, true or false, or just make a mental note. You'll be feeling if most of them are true or most of them are false. So I'm going to read each one twice. True or false? The intensity of our suffering is a direct measure of how much we loved our person who died. And by the way, all the things that we talk about with death or grief about a person dying can be applied to loss of health, to loss of a job, to loss of a friend. Loss is loss. And it's just most easily talked about through death because the reactions can be more extreme and more easily visible, understandable, touchable, if you will, discernible. So if you're on this show because you're resonating with a different kind of loss, even loss of limb or tooth, if you will, we're attached to these bodily parts. And so we can use any of these tools and techniques that are on this podcast to apply to any kind of grief. But here, let's go on. True or false? A parent who loses a child can never feel whole again. True or false? A parent who loses a child can never feel whole again. True or false? A parent's worth is determined by the struggles of their least functional child. True or false? A parent's worth is determined by the struggles of their least functional child. True or false? If you truly love someone, you'll never or likely never experience that kind of love again. True or false? If you truly love someone, you'll never experience that kind of love again with anyone else. True or false? If someone close to you dies by suicide, it means you missed something and should have done more to prevent it. True or false? If somebody close to you dies by suicide, it means you missed the signs and should have done more to prevent it. True or false? Life is always better than death. And it's our duty to help people keep living no matter what. True or false? Life is always better than death. And it's our duty to help people keep living no matter what. True or false? People who are grieving need to move on within a specific time so that they can fully live again. People who are grieving, true or false, need to move on within a specific time frame to live fully again, true or false. The amount of time it takes to feel open to living again after a loss depends solely on the depth of our grief and the depth of our love. True or false, the amount of time it takes to feel open to living again after a loss depends solely on the depth of the grief and the depth of the love. True or false, if someone appears to be coping well with grief, they're probably suppressing their true feelings. True or false, if someone appears to be coping well with grief, they're probably suppressing their true feelings. True or false, talking about death and grief only makes it harder for people to heal. True or false, talking about death and grief only makes it harder for people to heal. True or false, moving forward with your life after a loss dishonors the memory of your loved one. True or false, moving forward with your life after a loss dishonors the memory of your loved one. True or false, strong people don't need help or support during grief. True or false, strong people don't need help or support during grief. True or false, there is a right and a wrong way to grieve. True or false, there is a right or a wrong way to grieve. True or false, grief ends once you've gone through its stages. Grief is over, true or false, once you've gone through the stages. So there aren't right or wrong answers. But did you get lots of truths or lots of falses? It doesn't even matter that you tally it. Mostly my desire was that you get in the vibe of your honest beliefs about grief and about death. Now I think it's time I tell you a little about my story. And my memoir is in this book, When Wisdom Arrives, From Imagined Unworthiness to Freedom. And it's a memoir, and it's a fable about our thoughts and feelings and how we get stuck. And then there's a Q&A at the end. And it's most relevant because the entire book, fable, my own story with my daughter, and the Q&A revolve around our looping thoughts and feelings. And what is grief, if we talk about it differently? Isn't it looping thoughts and feelings? That's what the stages are. But stages are something else. And just to be sure I be clear about what I'm offering and what we might be moving away from, is that denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance, those phrases, those stages, quote unquote, came to us from the great Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. But she never meant those to be prescriptive. And she never said that acceptance comes from being in those previous stages. She was describing what she saw happening to people at the end of their lives and to people who were saying goodbye. And so today, I would like you to put just the littlest bit of possibility into reframing those stages, because I had a different grief trajectory. We all have different grief stories, different grief experiences. And I started out in the stages of grief, but I ended up somewhere else. So let me start with the history of where it all began and where this story today begins, because it's with my daughter, Melissa, who unexpectedly died at age 39. We had no idea that she was sick. I mean, we knew she wasn't feeling well, but we had no idea that anything life-threatening could be going on. So it was very shocking. Death seems to always be shocking because we're, as a society, ill-prepared for death because I think it's because of our love for life and our denial that death is going to happen to all of us. And if we admit it, there's a conditioned belief that death is bad and life is good. It's just what I've noticed, what I pick up in death-defying creeds. No, they say age-defying creeds, if you will, but what they really mean is death-defying, because aging, right? Aging is society's understanding that it's a precursor to death. But I want to tell you our story, my story with Melissa. And you know what? It's not the prettiest story because we struggled. We struggled over weight, and it was a kind of epigenetic story. That's a word that means that the story is repeated in our genes. Biologists have found that repetitive behaviors, beliefs in families can be repeated in the genes, but they also can change when the behavior, the feelings, and thoughts change. So they've seen the change in the genes as well. But we had 3+ generations of women who judged their daughters. They judged them on weight. And my older daughter was born 4 pounds 6 ounces, so there was no concern about weight. She was teeny tiny, and that actually, at the time, my reaction to that size was to feel very safe. I was not aware of that. I was the daughter of a mother who worried about my weight. She took me out of school. I was 8 or 10. I left school to go to a diet clinic. I don't know how chubby I was, but at the time, I did not feel aware that there was anything wrong with me. Yes, I'd already been teased. Yeah, it wasn't fun to be more than chubby. I was on my way to being obese. But it was not a gift to further take me out of school for going to a diet clinic. But there were some pluses. We got to have lunch together after we got weighed in. I don't remember the diet plan because I was on subsequent diet plans, a gazillion of them. But I do remember the grilled cheese and the non-fat milk and the vanilla that my mother took out of her purse to pour into the non-fat milk for us. And it was a very special treat because, as my sister said when she read the book, I never got to go out with Mom. So, yeah, it felt special, but it's like, yes, there are payoffs even when things have happened that we don't desire. And that's even true about grief. When we've had someone die, we get a whole lot of love from the world. Most of us do, not everyone. And it's different sometimes when there's been a suicide. But when we hold on to a feeling or a thought or an experience, it behooves us to look at what do we get out of it, because there's often a payoff. Maybe it's not what we would have chosen, but when we repeat something, sometimes it's just what we've been taught by society. And we've certainly been taught that the way to handle death is to suffer. The story about Melissa, we went through many rough years where Melissa felt judged just as I had been judged as a daughter. And by the way, my mother was judged by her mother. And it was during the Nazi era. And my mother was woken up at 6 a.m. in the morning to run around the streets. Now, picture this. The Nazis, they're not safe as a Jewish family. And her mother was so worried about her weight that she had her running around the streets. I mean, it's a kind of craziness that goes beyond the reality of a person or a child's size. But if you're Jewish, that was our Mishigas craziness. All families, or most families, have some threads of what we might consider craziness. So that was ours. And it went on very painfully because I could see as a psychotherapist, I was an eating disorder specialist. I knew better. And I went to all kinds of programs. I went into therapy. I went to spiritual groups. I did things like A Course in Miracles, which showed me how dangerous and hard judging is. I already knew that. Couldn't stop, could not stop. And I apologized to Melissa, but I couldn't really completely stop. And it was very hurtful. I could see the hurt in her eyes. And then we went through a period. I'm shortening it. If you want to hear more, pick up the book. It's also on Kindle. But just jumping ahead, something really relevant happened. We got a chance, my husband and I and 4 other people, to visit with Lorna Byrne in Ireland. And some people call her the greatest living Irish mystic. And she wrote a book, Angels in My Hair, and I highly recommend it. And I read that book just because it was part of a spiritual course I was taking. I had no opinions about angels. Most of you out there are more knowledgeable than I was in 2018 about angels and the gifts and so on. Lorna Byrne, if you don't know her, was raised by angels. And the angels said, don't tell anybody because they'll take you away. In those days, she would have been put in an asylum. So the angels were right. She had a severe learning disability. Anyhow, we got to go in 2017 and have a visit with Lorna Byrne. This changed everything. We'd been getting better and better, Melissa and I. We did some ancestral work. We did forgiveness work. She became a coach, so she understood a lot of what was happening was not her unworthiness, but my family's mishigas. And we were determined. We were determined to have this end with us. We hadn't gotten there, but we were close. And Lorna said nothing about my older daughter. She said nothing about my husband and my marriage. She did scan our bodies and say that we were healthy now, but if we kept on worrying about Melissa, we would become decrepit and ill. Well, I don't know if it was that, and that certainly got my attention. I wanted neither being decrepit or ill, but I really think it was her tone of voice. She's a very soft-spoken person. And I heard it as yelling. I won't yell, but it was like yelling. And it was like, stop the judging, stop the worrying. A lot of times as parents, we give each other a pass on worrying. But just as an aside, does worrying really uplift the person you worry about? Does it make them stronger? Or do they pick up your feeling that they're not competent or on the right path? So worrying, while it might be typical, it is not good for you or shouldn't be usual. We shouldn't give each other a pass, says I as a psychotherapist and a person who's been hurt by somebody else's worrying. So what did she say about Melissa? She said, you must stop worrying. And then she said some things to Melissa about her dogs and about her life. And when I got home, I told Melissa everything she'd said. And about a month later, Melissa was a changed person. She had been evolving. Yes, for sure she'd been evolving, but not next to what happened. She began hearing from angels. What did she hear? She heard things like, buy that size 14 dress and leave it in the hotel for the woman who's coming to clean. Get rid of your wiglet that we all thought made her look so great. She got rid of it. She listened to these voices, but she was feeling like she was hearing from angels, and she did every single thing that she heard. She was the most surrendered person I had ever met. Some of them ideas she did not care for. They would say, wear these short shorts. And she said, Mom, I look ridiculous in these short shorts. But She wore them. She bought them, whatever they said. And we did it too. Before Melissa died, we did not know she was going to die. A month before, we were staying in Florida. We live here for the winter, Seattle for the 6 months that are not winter. And Melissa was in Seattle. And he said, ahead of Thanksgiving, let's take Melissa to Universal Studios, because I remember her almost whispering. Melissa was a very soft-spoken person. And she said to her dad, sometime I would love to go to Universal Studios and see Harry Potter. Well, thank goodness my husband remembered that. And because she wasn't feeling that well, we exchanged her ticket for a first-class ticket. We got miles, and it ended up that we gave her the trip of a lifetime. If she had said, I'm dying and I want one more trip, she would have asked for first class, because she'd only experienced it once or twice in her life and loved it. And she would have gone to Harry Potter. And by the way, the angels for the last months of her life, maybe 4 or 5, only allowed her to read Harry Potter books. Go figure. If you don't believe in angels, just say it was her higher self, her imagination. Whatever the voices are, don't matter. Like the origin, we could argue, but it doesn't matter. It's what happened. Melissa became this self-assured person who was powerful. On the last day she was alive, we were texting because I was not certain about her energy, and I was checking in on her. So I asked a question of the angels. Everybody was asking questions of the angels, my girlfriends, strangers who would get her name, because the angels said, work for free, you won't have a need for money. And so the last day she was alive, I asked her a question and said, I was doing this volunteer work with a friend, and she asked me to take over. And it was easy for me to do as a former psychotherapist. And the group loved it, so I did it. And I asked Melissa, if I had not done that, I was really asking the angels, if I had not taken over, would this woman have found her power and strength? And her answer was, never hide your brilliance to make someone else look better, or something like that. So that's the kind of strength she had when she delivered. So why am I telling you all of this? Let's get to my grief trajectory. So Melissa dies. I'm distraught. She's 3,000 miles away. The police discover her. It's everybody's worst nightmare, every mother's worst nightmare. She died alone. The dogs were all bloody because they tried to save her. Can you picture the thoughts that were going round and round in my head? So one of the first things I began doing was, I didn't know who I was typing toward. Was I asking Melissa? Was I asking the angels? But I needed communication because I was in a hell with my thoughts and feelings. I was as distraught with cycling through stages of grief. I'm not really sure. It all felt like pain. I wasn't even bothering to say which stages it was. Pain and suffering and a looping of thoughts and feelings. Anybody recognize that space? Of course you do. That's what it's like, right? So fast forward, I'm getting a little bit used to having a life of suffering. By the way, I'm retired when I was first in Marco Island, having a lovely retirement, enjoying my life when Melissa died. And so I'm on the beach and I'm thinking, geez, I could walk straight out and maybe be with Melissa across the horizon. What a good idea. Seemed like a good idea. But you know what? It passed in the next second and something happened. I didn't join that idea. I didn't add to it. I just let it be. And pretty soon, I was being shaken. Now, I'd had this feeling of being shook before, and it wasn't like nervousness or feeling shaky inside. It was like I was being shook back and forth. And I was in the middle of walking into the horizon, but I started the hurting thoughts and feelings back. And back they came. And all of a sudden, after I noticed the shaking, the suffering was gone. And I heard a voice say, "You're okay." And I took stock and figured out, yes, how can that be? I'm okay. I am okay because she's still dead. How can I be okay? And I'm not sure how much time went by, but the next thought I had was, I can't tell anybody I'm okay because mothers who love their daughters have to suffer. And I went, what? Are you kidding? That makes no sense. But that is something I had believed, of course. Now, we do have all the natural feelings of grief, but I want you to hear they don't need to be stages where we get stuck. They can just be feelings that move through us, feelings like other feelings, which are energy in motion. But I wasn't with my therapist hat and I wasn't figuring anything out. But here I had the memory she's dead. I am okay. I could go back to suffering because mothers have to suffer. No, I don't want to stand for that craziness. But I didn't know how I could live okay. And actually, I had one more thought there, which proves that it's a taboo, at least to me. I asked myself, could you pretend you're still suffering and be okay? Can you believe I thought that? I said, no, that's not an option. But I didn't know how I would live. Now, that was January 2018. And the way it has stayed with me is this way. I don't think about life as a choice because it feels a whole lot more like things happen that are out of our control. So I don't use the word choice, but it feels like a choice. So if you like choice, think of it as a choice. When I have a moment where I could return to suffering, like through nostalgia, which for me always ends in suffering. It ends with my hurting because I can't have that anymore. Darn. That's what nostalgia ends up with. I start out, oh, it was so much fun. La, 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 la. Oh, can't have that anymore. I'm trying to express the pain. I'm not a great actress, but I'm trying to show you how it ended for me. Nostalgia. So think about it. If you think another crazy thing people say. To me, it's crazy. It might work for you. People say you have your memories. The memories that don't hurt are like Melissa loved dogs. That's just true. But can you hear the difference between Melissa loved dogs and, oh, I loved sharing with Melissa over coffee and going over our new strategies with our clients? How's that going to end up? For me, that's how it ends up. So I don't go there. Here's the beginning of the pearl for you. I want to tell you about a small gathering experience I'm going to be offering probably in early February. And it's specifically for people from this podcast. And it's going to help you figure out your vision. But let me lay it out for you here. Your vision is how you would like your life to be led by, what you want. In other words, what is the belief that you would like? Let's say the belief is, I want to live feeling okay, but I don't know how to get there. Now, you might, right after that, see what you need to release. It'll be your block. No, you can't be okay. Your son died. Your husband died. Society has not taught us how to be okay. And I'm living proof that it can be that way and stay that way. My okayness never leaves. Yes, I have feelings. Do I miss her at Christmas? Would I do anything any day to get her back? Of course. But I don't go there. That's the choice. Like nostalgia, I don't allow myself, because I know what life was like in suffering, ruminating, looping thoughts and feelings that go round and round. And that's what creates the illusion that it's a stage. So we have your vision, we have your block or what you would like to release. And then in this session that I'm offering, this experience, we're going to get to know your person through you. Yes, talk about your person. But what I have found is that I have a whole new life based on honoring Melissa. I get to speak, I get to do individual and group work, but I've never given everything to one place. I give this part, the Enneagram. I'm an expert in personality. I've done tapping, I've done grief work, but I've never brought it all together like I'm going to do for this group of 8 people. So there'll be a link on the show notes to how to contact me. If you're not there yet and you just want to show up for free with me in a group of people, we have Courageous Connections every first and third Monday of every month at 1:30. Sign up on my website and you'll get a Zoom link. And that's just show up. So I want to offer you how to apply all this to your life. But let me give you a little more. You have your vision of how you would like to feel. Then you see the belief that's in the way. Now, have a yes that's the tiniest yes. What I mean by that is break it down. Chances are you're not going to go from wherever you are, if you're in a stuck stage, and go to the freedom that's available. I mean, maybe you will. And if you do, bravo, join me for that and show up to connect with the other people. But if you're like most people, it's going to take a few more steps. So find a yes. So maybe you've just been eating to survive. find a yes where you allow yourself something delicious, or where you have to go to a little trouble, or where you find something symbolic of that person, and you decide you're going to celebrate your person with that. You're not going to go down the rabbit hole of suffering. There's that choice, that parting of the roads. It's suffering or okay. The okay really does lead to even more expansion, but I'm not going to talk about that because it's a natural outgrowth of acceptance of what happened. The one thing I didn't say about the stages earlier is that they're all a bit of a fight with what happened. Do you see that with denial, anger, bargaining? I wish it didn't happen. I could have done this. It shouldn't have. Why? So let's bring it all home and notice our thoughts. Here's the trick that can be life-changing. When you notice a negative or hurtful thought, it's not going to hurt you unless you add to it. So just take that pause. Notice it's hurtful and stop there. Now you still have a choice of a new moment. That thought, that feeling, it's gone. But what we do is add to it, and that's the problem. So it's my pleasure to have been with you today. I hope you got some jewels. I loved being here. Thank you, and bye for now.
Thanks for tuning in to Grief and Rebirth. Remember, you can dive deeper into everything we've discussed by checking out the show notes and all past episodes at ireneweinberg.com. Don't forget to follow us on social media at Irene S. Weinberg on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and wherever you love to hang out online. Plus, we're on YouTube, so be sure to subscribe and never miss a video. For those of you listening, you'll find links to my 2 books, Good to the Last Drop and They Serve Bagels in Heaven, in the show notes. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can see those books listed right above, so don't miss out. And here comes a special treat. If you sign up for Audible as a first-time user using my link, which you can find in the show notes, you can get They Serve Bagels in Heaven for free. And finally, people often ask me what I read, what I use, and what I recommend for healing and self-care. So I've carefully curated a compilation of those items to share with you. You can head over to kit.co/grief and rebirth to check them out. Thanks again for tuning in, and until next time, many blessings.